pesticide-free product, and that's what consumers are looking for today.
In an earlier conversation, you were sharing about how there's this confusion also with hydroponics, that just because you grow food in a hydroponic method doesn't mean you haven't shipped it a long way or radiated it, etc. Explain it.
Right, and hydroponic production is just a method of growing food, just like growing it out in your garden is. But a hydroponic tomato can produced a long ways away from you, for instance, up in Canada or down in Mexico, and you're shipping it to the East Coast. That produce is not very fresh by the time that you've received it, and their criteria for a good, healthy, or a good tomato is one that they can drop from 3 feet without damaging it. Well, that certainly doesn't speak to it tasting good. What they do is they pick them green, they put them in a truck, and they gas them on the way to their destination so that they're ripe when they arrive. And I think a lot of people get that thought by buying a tomato that simply says hydroponic on it in the grocery store. They taste one, and it doesn't taste like anything more than those old hothouse tomatoes that we used to get that everybody complained about in the middle of the winter time. That's because they're the same thing. They're tomatoes that have been grown in a greenhouse using a hydroponic growing method, but they still weren't ripened, and they were still shipped a long way to get to you. They were only ripened artificially. So the fruit didn't make it, the sugar didn't make it to the fruit, and therefore they don't have a flavor, a good flavor like a garden tomato that you picked ripe and the fruit's already gone from the plant to the fruit. So it's not the growing method, it's whether the plant was grown locally, harvested locally, and made it to your grocery store in a ripe condition.
That's really important. For example, I shop at Whole Foods and Trader Joe's out here. I try to get to the local farmers markets. But when I go to Trader Joe's, for example, the fruit is from all over the world.
Right.
It's not necessarily local. Every now and then you'll find something local. And then there's a whole question is it genetically modified? I don't know. There's a whole other sticker for that. It's getting more complicated to sort that when you go to a traditional market.
Absolutely. And it's getting to know your farmers, your local farmers, and that's why sometimes I wonder if the hydroponic label is even as important as it is to be able to say, this is a locally grown product. It was ripened naturally, and it's pesticide-free. And that's, I think, the buzzwords that today's consumer is looking for.
And you're seeing more of that. It was the organic push, and organics was just huge, and it still is a big market. And what's happening now is the big players in agriculture are getting into the organic market, and so it's kind of losing some of its
luster,
appeal. When like you said, when you go to Trader Joe's and you buy an organic radish that was still grown in California and shipped 1,500 miles away, is there really much benefit to that, as opposed to if you were purchasing local radishes where you knew the farmer and you knew that he didn't use pesticides and you knew where it was grown, et cetera, et cetera. I think that more people are actually looking for that than they are for just some generic label that's governed by a body that is some unknown saying this is what is organic and this is what's not organic. I think that the local food movement or the slow food movement is gaining popularity on the organic movement.
Well, and again, even with organics, it's what is the entity that is governing to say that it is organic. Some of them are a percentage of organic. Well, what percentage of them isn't organic? Does that mean, you're allowed to spray some pesticide in there? Organic in Mexico may mean something very different than an organic product grown in Ohio.
You mean there's no organic standard across the board?
No, there is, but it's governed by a government organization that's determining what is and isn't allowed to be used, for organics. Whereas when the organic movement started and when people fell in love with organics, it was governed individually, locally by certifying agents who were local, and it was more of a local movement that got a name called organics than it was today when it's, the OMRI or these large certifying agencies governing organics. It was.
If you look at your organic label, though, there are percentages. There are still different ways that it can be called organic. So you need to really inspect what it says. Is it an OMRI certified organic product?
Right. Is it an organic product, or is it made with organic products, or does it contain organic products? It's not necessarily just organic.
I understand that the enzymes in soil and in most foods are gone now. Unless you are eating something fresh, you don't get the enzymes. Is that your experience as well?
I don't know a lot about that, I guess I'd have to admit.
That's one of the benefits of eating fresh fruits and vegetables, is that they're nutrient dense and they still have the enzymes contained in them.
Right, they've not been heated or cooked, but you have different levels of vitamins in there depending on how fresh it is or how ripe it is. More vitamin C in something. For instance, a green pepper has much less vitamin C in it than a red or an orange pepper has. Because
I didn't know that.
A green pepper is an unripe pepper.
And I think that probably has more to do, though, with its age, etc., as opposed to the form how it was grown. Because regardless if a plant takes up organic nutrients or synthetic nutrients, it's processing them the same way.
It will convert them to organic nutrients. Except for in the case of a lettuce leaf. When a lettuce leaf takes something up and then you eat the lettuce leaf before it's converted it to organic matter, you're eating it however it took it up. So for instance, in organic systems, the form that the fertilizer is when the lettuce plant took it up, like the wild pigs that went to the bathroom on the lettuce out in California and people got E. coli from it. It's because the lettuce plant, the leaves have not had the opportunity yet to convert them to organic matter before you're consuming them. In the case of a fruit like a tomato or an apple or something, it's going through the whole process before it makes it out to that piece of fruit. And at that point, they're all organic.
Isn't this a timing-based system as well? You can ruin a plant by not timing things properly. Am I correct about that?
In that, instead of getting it from nature, you're providing it through a pump that's pumping water and nutrients to it, or heaters as opposed to the sun outside. You're growing in the springtime because that's when it's warm. Well, in a greenhouse, you're growing in the winter and you're providing heat. So a timing in that if something goes wrong, if there's a malfunction, then yes, you don't have the same buffer as you do from growing a garden outdoors in Mother Nature's conditions. But
by the same token, you have more buffer because Mother Nature may freeze the produce where you can keep it warm in your greenhouse.
Right, assuming that your equipment is all working, it isn't an issue. But that's the only timing I can think of. It's not necessarily a timing of on day 4 you have to...
Yeah, I can't really think of timing either. That was...
planting timing, but again, that's going to be the same inside or out.
There's a lot of new up-and-coming companies that are calling themselves sustainable and trying to work in urban environments to establish vertical hydroponic systems. What do you think of that?
Vertical growing is certainly an interesting concept. Being able to put more plants in the same space sounds like a good idea. The reality of that is a very different thing. It's been a lot of years ago that we had a greenhouse size, a 30 by 128-foot greenhouse, that we used to put 1,000 plants in it. And we did some research on it, and what we came up with was by planting 870 plants in that same space that we used to put 1,000, we got exactly the same production. Each plant produced more fruit than when we had more of them crammed in there. So it saved us time and labor and money for cost of materials to plant that many more plants. And so then it was more profitable by putting less plants in the same greenhouse. It's kind of the same thing with vertical systems. When they try to stack more plants in there and put them on top of each other, there's only a limited amount of sunshine and CO2 and all the things that plants need to help them grow. It's not just being able to give them the fertilizer they need. They need to be able to convert that food into actual plant production by photosynthesis. So these vertical systems, what they tell you is, well, you can rotate them so each plant gets an equal amount of sunshine. And that's true. They might get the equal amount of sunshine, but it's still less sunshine than if they